The rain had started early that morning, a relentless, steady drizzle that soaked into the earth, turning the cemetery grounds into a sea of mud. It felt appropriate, as if even the sky mourned today. But not everyone mourned. I stood there, hands clenched into fists, staring at the small white casket in front of me. Inside lay my son, Noah. 5 years old? 5 years old. I had no tears left. I had shed them all in the past week, through sleepless nights, through the agony of making arrangements no parent should ever have to make. There was nothing left inside me but a hollow, seething rage. Because as I stood here, burying our child, my wife was thousands of miles away. With him. I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket, but I already knew who it was. I shouldn't have checked. I should have ignored it, let the anger settle and turn to ice, let it make me stronger before I saw whatever pathetic excuse she had for not being here. But against my better judgment, I pulled it out, shielding the screen from the rain. Megan, sorry, important business meeting. I'll make it up to you. Make it up to me. Make it up to me. My grip on the phone tightened so hard I thought I might shatter it in my palm. A business meeting. That's what she called it. Not, I'm sorry I'm not there for you, for our son. Not, I wish I could be by your side in this darkest moment. Not even a damn I love you. Just a casual brush-off. A business meeting. I knew better. I had known for weeks, long before Noah's condition took its final turn. Megan had been distant, her work trips growing longer, her excuses thinner. I'd ignored the warning signs at first. Told myself she was just overwhelmed, just processing things differently. But then, I found the plane tickets. 2 of them. She had booked the trip to Hawaii 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago. When Noah was still fighting for his life in a hospital bed. When I sat beside him every night, holding his tiny hand, praying for a miracle. Megan had been planning a getaway with him. And she thought I didn't know. The funeral director cleared his throat gently. Mr. Carter, it's time. I nodded stiffly, swallowing the bow rising in my throat. I turned to face the small gathering of people who had come to pay their respects. Family. Friends. People who actually cared. People who had supported me through every painful moment of this nightmare. My mother stood beside me, gripping my arm tightly, her face a mask of heartbreak. Megan's absence didn't go unnoticed. I had avoided their questions all week. Where is she? When is she getting in? Will she be here? I had dodged, made excuses. But now, as they stared at me with that mixture of pity and judgment, I saw the speculation in their eyes. They knew something was wrong. They just didn't know how bad it really was. Not yet. Because what Megan really didn't know was that I had been keeping records. Hotel bookings. Text logs. Plane tickets. Receipts. Every single lie she had told me was documented, neatly stored away. And what she absolutely didn't know. By the time she returned from her little vacation, she wouldn't have a home to come back to. No marriage. No access to our finances. No son to manipulate me into staying. I turned my gaze back to the casket, my chest heaving with slow, controlled breaths. Noah, I whispered, so low only I could hear. I promise you, she won't get away with this. And with that, I took the first step toward a truth that would tear everything apart. The house felt empty when I stepped inside, the kind of silence that made my skin crawl. It wasn't the peaceful kind of quiet, the type you crave after a long day. It was hollow, unnatural. The echoes of laughter that once filled these walls were long gone. The last time Noah ran down this hallway, his little feet pounding against the hardwood, was forever burned into my mind. And Megan? She should have been here. She should have been the one to walk through that door with me. But no, she was sipping cocktails on a beach with her lover, while I buried our son in the rain. I clenched my jaw, forcing the thought aside. I had things to do. I pulled out my phone, scrolling past Megan's last text. Sorry, important business meeting. I'll make it up to you. The words made my blood boil all over again, but I had more important messages to focus on. One from my lawyer. Daniel, everything is in motion. Call me when you're ready to go over next steps. I would. Soon. Another from my private investigator. Elliot confirmed. She's at the resort in Maui. Room 214, oceanfront suite. She checked in with him Friday night. Photos attached. I clicked on the attachments. The first one showed Megan at the airport, her blonde hair tucked under a sun hat, designer sunglasses covering half her face. But I'd know that body language anywhere, the slight lean into the man next to her, the way her fingers brushed against his arm. The next photo was worse. Megan on the balcony of a luxury resort, wrapped in nothing but a towel, sipping a mimosa. A man stood behind her, his arm lazily draped around her waist, his face turned just enough for the camera to catch his smug expression. I knew him. Of course I did. Brandon Walker. The friend she always swore was just a colleague. The one she had to meet for drinks, after late-night work events. The one whose name had popped up on her phone more times than I could count. I exhaled sharply, setting the phone down before I put a hole through the wall. She thought she was untouchable. She thought she could do this to me, to us, and come back home like nothing had happened. She had no idea what was coming. I walked into my home office, my hands steady as I powered on my laptop. The screen glowed in the dim room, illuminating the stacks of documents I had gathered over the past month. At first, I hadn't wanted to believe it. The late nights. The cold distance between us. The way she stopped looking at me like she used to. I made excuses for her. I told myself she was grieving Noah in her own way. That she needed space. That maybe, just maybe, I was overthinking. But then I found the plane tickets. First class. Non-refundable. Booked 3 weeks ago. Before Noah even took his last breath. Before we even had the chance to say goodbye. I clenched my fists against the desk. Megan had never intended to grieve with me. She had planned to leave me. To run off to paradise with Brandon while I drowned in sorrow alone. The worst part? If Noah hadn't gotten worse, if he had pulled through, she would have still gone. She didn't even wait for our son to be gone before making her escape. The realization made my stomach turn, but I didn't let it consume me. Not now. I had work to do. I opened my financial accounts first. Megan had always left the money side of things to me, never bothered to learn about our investments, our assets, our accounts. She liked spending, not managing. Big mistake. Because as of 5 minutes ago, Megan no longer had access to anything. I moved fast. Froze joint accounts. Revoked her credit cards. Redirected her direct deposits to a private account. By the time she realized what was happening, she wouldn't have a cent to her name. Then I pulled up my lawyer's email, scanning through the divorce petition one last time. Ironclad. Every bit of evidence I had, her affair, her abandonment of her family, the financial records, was woven into the paperwork. Megan thought she was getting away with this. She was wrong. The next morning, I sat in my truck outside the law office, gripping the divorce papers in my hands. I had planned everything meticulously. By the time Megan touched down at the airport, she would walk into a very different life than the one she left. Her key wouldn't work in the house. Her bank cards would decline. Her clothes would be packed and waiting in a storage unit under her name, prepaid for 3 months. She would be served with divorce papers on arrival. And most importantly, she would come home to nothing. She would have to face the truth she had been running from. She didn't just lose me. She lost everything. And as I stared at the rain tapping against my windshield, I felt the faintest flicker of something I hadn't felt in weeks. Satisfaction. Because Megan had made her choice. And now, she would face the consequences. I sat in my truck outside the lawyer's office for a long time, the rain tapping against the windshield in a slow, rhythmic patter. The divorce papers lay on the passenger seat, the weight of them heavier than anything I had ever held before. This wasn't just a legal document. This was the end of everything Megan and I had built. And yet, there was no sadness. No hesitation. Just a cold, simmering resolve. She had made her choice. She had packed her bags, boarded that plane, and left me to bury our son alone. She had forfeited her right to a husband, to a home, to a life built on my love and devotion. Now it was my turn. I picked up my phone and dialed Daniel, my lawyer. He picked up on the first ring. "You ready?" he asked. "More than ready," I said. There was a pause. "I know this isn't easy, Eric. Even with everything she's done." I exhaled slowly, watching the rain roll down the glass. "It's easier than you think." "All right," he said. "We'll have her served at the airport the moment she lands. I'll file everything with the court first thing tomorrow morning. Make sure they time it perfectly. I want it in her hands before she even gets in a cab." A short chuckle. "Cold-blooded. I like it." I hung up and started the engine, the rumble of the truck cutting through the silence. The plan was in motion. By this time tomorrow, Megan would be homeless, broke, and alone. That night I barely slept. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying every memory of Megan, the woman she used to be, before she became the stranger who abandoned us. I thought about our early years, when we were young and in love, when we dreamed of a future together. I thought about the first time she told me she was pregnant with Noah, the way her face had lit up with excitement. I had believed in that love, in that life we had built. But it had all been a lie. Somewhere along the way, she had stopped seeing me as her husband and started seeing me as an obstacle. Something to leave behind. She just never expected me to fight back. At 6 a.m., my phone buzzed. "Elliot, private investigator, she and Brandon are flying back today. They land at 2:30 p.m. Your lawyer's people ready?" I smirked. "Me, they'll be waiting." I spent the morning making sure every detail was in place. I called the bank again. Megan's name had been completely removed from everything. She wouldn't even be able to withdraw gas money. Then I packed the last of her things. I had started the process days ago, boxing up her clothes, her makeup, even the jewelry I had spent years buying for her. I left nothing behind. By noon, everything was in storage. I sent her the address in a single text. "Me, your belongings are in a storage unit. It's prepaid for 3 months. You'll get the key when you're served at the airport." No response. She was probably still flying over the Pacific, blissfully unaware that her entire world was crumbling beneath her. 2:30 p.m. I sat in my truck outside the airport, watching the arrival screen in real time. Flight 317 from Honolulu landed. Showtime. I imagined it clearly, the moment Megan and Brandon stepped off the plane, all sun-kissed and relaxed from their little getaway. Maybe they were still laughing, still riding the high of their stolen paradise. And then, right at baggage claim, 2 process servers would approach her. "Are you Megan Carter?" "Yes." "You've been served." I pictured the moment her smug little vacation glow would shatter. Her confused blink. The growing panic in her eyes as she scanned the papers, realizing exactly what was happening. That there was no home waiting for her. No money. No marriage. Just the consequences of her choices. And then, the real kicker, the cherry on top. Right as she turned to Brandon, looking for comfort, for reassurance, he'd get served, too. Because my lawyer had found a way to drag him into this mess, too. See, Megan hadn't just been unfaithful. She had used our joint accounts to pay for that trip. I had proof, hotel receipts, airline charges, dinner bills, all tied to our shared finances. Which meant I could sue Brandon personally for alienation of affection and financial damages. That's right. Megan was walking off that plane divorced and broke. And Brandon? He was getting hit with a lawsuit. Hope they enjoyed their little vacation. Because it was the last bit of paradise either of them would ever see. 2:47 p.m. My phone buzzed again. "Daniel, it's done." She was livid. "Called you every name in the book." She tried to call her bank, declined. She called her lawyer, too late. She called you. I checked my call log. 5 missed calls. All from Megan. I smiled. And then I did what she had done to me when I needed her the most. I ignored her. She didn't deserve my words. She didn't deserve anything. And for the first time since Noah died, I felt freed out. I watched the phone vibrate on the dashboard, Megan's name flashing over and over. Call after call. She must have been spiraling, standing in the middle of the airport with nothing but her carry-on bag and the crumpled divorce papers in her hand. I imagined her frantically swiping through her banking apps, watching every single one of them flash the same error: insufficient funds. She probably tried her credit cards next. Declined. The realization must have hit her like a freight train. She had nothing. No money, no home, no husband to crawl back to. And I wanted her to feel it. I picked up my phone, letting her call go to voicemail. Another one came through. Then another. And then, finally, she sent a text. Megan, what the hell is this? You froze everything? You served me with divorce papers at the airport? A few seconds later, another message. Megan, answer me, Eric. I let her stew. A minute later, another text came through, but this one wasn't from Megan. It was from my private investigator. Elliot, she's in full meltdown mode. Caught on airport security cam screaming at Brandon. He walked away. Looks like he's leaving her behind. I grinned. That was the part one had been waiting for. Megan had risked everything for that pathetic excuse of a man, and in the end, he wasn't even willing to stand by her. He used her. He wanted a stolen vacation, some reckless fun at my expense. But now, the fantasy was over. She was no longer the confident, beautiful woman sneaking away for secret rendezvous. She was toxic. A liability. A walking disaster. And Brandon was smart enough to know that he was next in my line of fire. He had his own life to protect, his own reputation, his own assets. So, like the coward he was, he did the one thing cheaters always do when things get real. He ran. Megan called again, this time leaving a voicemail. I played it on speaker, leaning back in my truck seat as her shrill, angry voice filled the cab. You selfish, vindictive bastard! You took everything from me. I was grieving too, Eric. I just needed time away. How could you do this to me? I almost laughed. She wasn't grieving. She was sipping Mai Tais on a beach while I buried our son alone. I could still hear the sound of the rain pounding against Noah's tiny casket. The priest's voice, solemn and soft, telling me that my baby boy was at peace. I could still feel the stares from our friends and family, watching, whispering, wondering where Megan was. That was grief. That was loss. What Megan was feeling now. That was karma. And she wasn't done yet. Her next message came through a few minutes later. Megan, please, Eric. Just talk to me. I didn't think you would do this. I swear I was coming home. I rolled my eyes. She was desperate now. Trying to switch from rage to guilt, as if that would work on me. Then, another text. But this time, she wasn't begging. She was threatening. Megan, you're making a huge mistake. If you don't fix this, I'll take you to court. I'll fight for half of everything. There it was. The real Megan Carter. Not the heartbroken wife. Not the grieving mother. The opportunist. The woman who didn't love me, only what I provided. But she had no idea just how deep my preparation went. I clicked on my lawyer's message thread and typed back. Me, she's threatening a court battle. Let's move forward with everything. Daniel replied almost instantly. Daniel, she doesn't have a case. She abandoned the marriage. We have proof. Infidelity, financial fraud. If she tries anything, she'll walk away with less than nothing. I smirked. Megan thought she still had power over me. She thought she could bluff her way into regaining control. But she was playing checkers while I was playing chess. I had built my case meticulously. I had the receipts. The text logs. The paper trail. She wouldn't win. She wouldn't even get close. A few hours passed and the calls stopped. The text slowed. Megan had finally realized she had no leverage. I knew what she was doing now, scrambling for options. Calling friends. Trying to find a place to stay. But most of our mutual friends? They had been at Noah's funeral. They had seen her absence. They knew. And no one wanted to associate with the woman who left her husband alone at their child's burial, while she ran off with another man. She had burned every bridge. Just as I had planned. By nightfall, a final text came through. Megan, I don't know where to go. I stared at the words, letting them sink in. This was the first time in years that Megan didn't have a safety net. She always had someone, me, her friends, her family, her affairs. But not anymore. I had taken everything she counted on. And she was truly alone. I exhaled slowly and typed my only response. Me, not my problem. Then, for the first time since this nightmare began, I turned off my phone. And slept soundly. I woke up early the next morning, feeling something I hadn't in weeks. Relief. For the first time since Noah got sick. Since the funeral. Since Megan left. Since I found out about her and Brandon. I had spent so much time drowning in grief, anger, and betrayal that I forgot what it was like to wake up without a crushing weight on my chest. But today was different. Because Megan Carter, the woman who had taken everything from me, was finally facing the consequences of her actions. And there was nothing she could do about it. I made coffee, took my time, and ignored my phone. I knew Megan would be scrambling. She had no money. No home. No one to help her. And as much as I wanted to enjoy not giving a damn, my curiosity got the best of me. I finally powered my phone back on. And just as expected, dozens of missed calls. Most from Megan. A few from an unknown number. Brandon? I smirked. He must have finally worked up the nerve to call me. I tapped on my voicemail, letting them play on speaker as I leaned back in my chair, sipping coffee. Voicemail number 1, 11:14 p.m. Megan. Eric, please. I have nowhere to go. I'm at the airport and Static, muffled sobs. You don't have to take me back, I don't know what to do. Click. Voicemail number 2, 12:37 a.m. Megan. You think you're so smart, don't you? Freezing my accounts? Blocking my cards? You're a petty, vindictive bastard. Click. Voicemail number 3, 3:02 a.m. Megan. Her voice was barely a whisper. Eric, please, just talk to me. Click. Voicemail number 4, 6:45 a.m., unknown number. Listen, man, this has gone far enough. You've made your point. Megan has nothing. Just let her come back and figure things out. I almost laughed. Brandon. He sounded tired. Frustrated. Like a man who had just realized how much of a mistake he had made. I grabbed my phone and typed a quick text. Me, you can take care of her, Brandon. She's your problem now. Delivered. Read. No response. Yeah, that's what I thought. I spent the rest of the morning tying up loose ends. I met with my lawyer to finalize the full asset transfer. The house, my business, everything, locked down. Megan had zero claim to any of it. The next step was Noah's room. I hadn't been able to go in since the night before the hospital, but today, I finally forced myself to. The scent of him was still there. That soft mix of baby shampoo and the stuffed animal he carried everywhere. His bed was still unmade from the last time he crawled out of it, his tiny sneakers still by the door. I sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing a hand down my face, swallowing the lump in my throat. Grief was a funny thing. Some days it crushed you. Others it barely whispered in the back of your mind. But right now, I wasn't sad. I was furious. Noah deserved better than the mother he had. I deserved better than the wife I had. Megan had abandoned us long before she got on that plane. And today, I was making peace with that. I exhaled, stood up, and shut the door behind me. By noon, I finally checked my messages again. Only one from Megan. Megan, I went to the house. My key didn't work. I know you're in there, Eric. Open the door. I chuckled darkly. She actually had the nerve to show up. I stood by the window, peeking through the blinds just enough to see the driveway. Megan stood there in last night's clothes, her suitcase at her feet. A mess. She had always been so put together, so obsessed with appearances. Now, she looked like a wreck. Good. I watched her pull out her phone and dial, probably trying to call me again. I picked up the landline and disconnected it. Then I typed out my final message. Me, this is not your home anymore. Get off my property, or I call the cops. I watched her pull out her phone, read the message, and completely break down. She tried calling again, then pounding on the door. But I just stood there, watching, silent, unmoved. Because Megan Carter had finally lost. And I wasn't going to save her. Megan stood outside for a long time. At first, she pounded on the door, screaming my name, demanding I talk to her. Then she tried pleading. Then, when that didn't work, she slumped against the door, sobbing. I watched it all from the window, arms crossed, expression blank. I had nothing left to give her, not my anger, not my sympathy, and certainly not my forgiveness. She had made her choices. And now, she had to live with them. After about 30 minutes, she finally stopped knocking. She pulled out her phone, hands shaking, and typed something. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't check it right away. I let her sit there in her defeat a little longer. Then, finally, I pulled out my phone and read her message. Megan, please, Eric. Just give me 5 minutes. 5 minutes. That was all she wanted. It was tempting, to hear her out. To let her see my face one last time, just to let her know she had truly lost me. I debated it for a full minute. And then, against my better judgment, I opened the door. Just a crack. Megan's eyes snapped up, red and swollen from crying. She looked like hell. She opened her mouth to speak, but I cut her off. You have 5 minutes, I said flatly. Then you're gone. She swallowed hard and nodded. Megan stepped inside, hesitantly, like she wasn't sure if she even belonged in this house anymore. She didn't. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. It took her a few moments to collect herself before she finally spoke. I never wanted this, Eric. Her voice was raw. I swear I didn't. I laughed. Actually laughed. That's rich, I said. You didn't want this? What part of this, exactly, wasn't your fault? She flinched. I made a mistake. I cocked my head. Which one? Booking a vacation with your lover while our son was dying? Missing his funeral? Or coming home and thinking I'd just take you back? She winced at every word, and for a brief second, I thought I saw actual regret in her eyes. But it didn't matter. Regret didn't change the fact that she had left. That she had abandoned me. That Noah had died without his mother by his side. And there was no coming back from that. Megan sniffled. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't know where to go. I scoffed. Not my problem. Her lips trembled. Eric. No. I snapped, my patience snapping with it. You don't get to stand here and act like the victim. You don't get to cry and ask me to save you. You made your choice, Megan. And now you live with it. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but I felt nothing. She had cried no tears for me at the funeral. She had felt no guilt when she was lying on a beach, drinking champagne with Brandon. So why should I feel anything for her now? She opened her mouth again, probably to beg. I didn't give her the chance. This conversation is over, I said, stepping back. Your things are in a storage unit. I sent you the address. You have 3 months before you have to start paying for it yourself. She swallowed hard. And after that? I shrugged. After that? I don't care. A fresh wave of hurt crossed her face. Good. She needed to feel it. She needed to know what it was like to be the one left behind. Megan took a shaky breath and nodded. She turned toward the door, hesitating for only a second before finally stepping outside. I waited until she had reached the driveway. Then, without another word, I closed the door and locked it behind her. I stood there for a while, listening. I heard her footsteps retreat, the sound of her suitcase wheels scraping against the pavement. Then, finally, silence. I exhaled. And for the first time in a long time, I felt freed. I stood by the door for a long time after Megan left, waiting for the familiar ache to settle in. The kind of ache that comes with endings, the realization that something you once held close was now gone forever. But it never came. Instead, all I felt was relief. A quiet, consuming relief that settled deep in my chest. Megan was gone. Not just from my house. Not just from my bank accounts. But from my life. She had spent months planning her escape. Now I had given her exactly what she wanted. And in the process, I had taken everything she thought she'd get to keep. The first thing I did was clean. It wasn't just about wiping away dust or throwing out old things. It was about erasing her presence. Every trace of Megan Carter had to go. Her old perfume bottles in the bathroom? Gone. Her favorite coffee mug? Smashed. The throw blankets she insisted we keep on the couch? Burned in the fire pit. I even stripped the bed, tossing out the sheets she used to sleep in. I wanted nothing of hers left. By the time I was done, the house felt lighter. Like it had been suffocating under the weight of her betrayal, and now, it could finally breathe again. A few days passed in quiet solitude. I didn't check my phone. I didn't answer calls. I just existed. For the first time in months, there was no anger. No tension. No wondering what excuse Megan would come up with next. The silence was peaceful. But it didn't last. On the fourth day, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I already knew who it was before I even opened it. Megan, I need to talk to you. Please. I sighed. Of course she did. She wasn't done yet. I didn't respond. Instead, I did something I should have done a long time ago. I blocked her number. Then, just to be safe, I blocked her email, her social media, and any possible way she could reach me again. I was done. And it was time for her to understand that. That evening I took a drive. I didn't know where I was going at first, I just needed air. But somehow, I found myself at the cemetery. Noah's grave sat in the far corner, shaded by a large oak tree. The flowers from the funeral were still there, slightly wilted from the rain. I exhaled and knelt beside the headstone, tracing my fingers over his name. "Hey, buddy," I murmured. "I know it's been a few days." The wind rustled the trees, the only response I'd ever get. I swallowed hard. "I think it's finally over," I whispered. "She's gone." I closed my eyes, letting the weight of that truth sink in. Megan wasn't here. Not just at the cemetery. Not in our house. Not in my life anymore. And somehow, despite the heartbreak, despite the loss, despite everything, I finally felt at peace. Days passed. Then a week. Then 2. And for the first time in years, my life was quiet. No late-night fights. No cold, distant glances. No stomach-churning suspicion every time Megan's phone buzzed. She was gone, and with her, all the chaos she brought. And yet, despite everything, I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. Because people like Megan? They don't just walk away. I had officially filed the divorce papers a week ago, and Daniel assured me that Megan didn't have a single leg to stand on. Abandonment. Infidelity. Misuse of marital assets. She wouldn't get a cent. And with zero money and nowhere to go, I assumed she had bigger problems to deal with than bothering me. But I was wrong. Because on a quiet Tuesday morning, she finally came back swinging. I was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee, when my phone buzzed. "Daniel, lawyer, we have a problem. Call me." I frowned and dialed immediately. Daniel picked up on the first ring. "Megan hired a lawyer." I let out a short laugh. "With what money?" Apparently, she found someone willing to take her case on contingency. My jaw tightened. What's she trying to do? She's claiming emotional distress, Daniel said. Says you left her homeless and financially destitute. I actually laughed. She left herself homeless, I said flatly. I gave her a storage unit, didn't I? You did. And we have overwhelming evidence in your favor. But here's the problem, she's desperate now. Which means she's going to throw everything she has at this, hoping something sticks. I exhaled slowly. I had seen this coming. I had known Megan wouldn't just fade into the background. She had lost everything. Now she was grasping at straws. Should I be worried? I asked. Daniel was silent for a moment. No, he said finally. But it's going to get messy. I hung up and rubbed a hand down my face. Messy. That was Megan's specialty. I wasn't worried about losing. I was worried about how much more of my time and energy she was going to waste before this was finally over. And judging by her track record, I had a feeling this was just the beginning. Later that night, I got a text from an unknown number. I already knew who it was before I even opened it. Megan, you think you can just erase me? You're going to regret this. I sighed. I should have blocked every number she could possibly reach me from. I typed out a single response. Me, go ahead and try. Then, for the second time, I blocked her again. Because Megan Carter could scream, cry, and threaten all she wanted. She had already lost. And nothing would change that. The lawsuit was a joke. Daniel had gone through every detail, and Megan didn't have a single argument that could hold up in court. Her claims of emotional distress? Laughable. The accusation that I had left her homeless? Easily disproven. We had text messages, receipts, and evidence showing that she had planned her little escape with Brandon long before Noah's condition worsened. She wasn't some poor, abandoned wife. She was a cheater who had gotten exactly what she deserved. But Megan wasn't fighting to win. She was fighting to drag me down with her. And that's what made her dangerous. On the day of the hearing, I walked into the courthouse with my lawyer, calm and prepared. Megan was already there, sitting across the hall with her cheap, desperate lawyer. And she looked terrible. Her once perfectly styled blonde hair was dull and limp. Dark circles sat under her eyes, and her clothes, while still expensive, looked messy, like she had thrown them on in a hurry. She looked like a woman who had lost everything. And for the first time, I realized something. She wasn't just trying to hurt me. She was trying to save herself. The hearing was brief. Megan's lawyer tried to argue that I had left her penniless and stranded. Daniel quickly shut that down. She left on her own, he said, dropping a stack of documents onto the judge's desk. She booked her vacation weeks before our client even filed for divorce. She spent joint money on that trip. She wasn't left with nothing, she wasted everything. Megan glared daggers at him. Then at me. And in that moment I saw it. The realization. She had lost. There was no coming back from this. The judge ruled in my favor. Megan got nothing. No money. No assets. No leverage. She walked out of that courthouse with the same thing she had walked in with. Nothing. And for the first time in months, I finally felt at peace. Outside, as I was getting into my truck, Megan approached me. I considered ignoring her. But something about the way she looked, hollow, exhausted, and utterly defeated, made me stop. She didn't speak at first. Then, finally, she whispered, "What am I supposed to do now?" Her voice wasn't angry anymore. It wasn't demanding. It was just lost. I studied her for a long moment. Then I shrugged. Not my problem. And with that, I got into my truck, started the engine, and drove away. For good. I didn't look back. Not at the courthouse. Not at Megan. Not at the wreckage she had made of her life. I just drove. And for the first time in a long, long time, I wasn't driving towards something broken. I wasn't chasing after explanations, fighting to hold the family together, or drowning in grief. I was finally, Finally, leaving it all behind. The divorce was final. Megan was gone from my life. And there was nothing left for her to take from me. I had kept the house, my business, my savings. She had nothing. And Brandon? He had dropped her the moment things got real. From what Daniel told me, he had refused to testify on her behalf, cut off all contact, and moved on. Megan had burned every bridge. And now, she was standing in the ashes, all alone. She did this to herself. And I refused to feel sorry for her. A few weeks passed. And for the first time, my life felt normal again. I got back to work, throwing myself into my business. I spent time with my family, letting them in again after months of shutting them out. I even started sleeping through the night without waking up in a cold sweat. But there was one thing I still had to do. Something I had been avoiding. Noah's room. I had closed the door weeks ago, leaving it untouched. It felt like a sacred space, one I wasn't ready to let go of. But I couldn't live in limbo anymore. I had to face it. I had to move forward. I opened the door slowly, exhaling as the familiar scent of his shampoo filled my lungs. His bed was still made. His toys were still neatly stacked in the corner. His favorite stuffed bear, Mr. Wiggles, sat on his pillow, waiting for him to come back. I picked it up, running a hand over the worn fabric. "I miss you, Kit," I murmured. I sat on the edge of his bed, letting the memories come. The nights we spent reading bedtime stories. The way he would jump into my arms when I got home from work. The sound of his laughter, so bright, so full of life. And then, the memory of his last days. The beeping monitors. The hospital bed. The way he squeezed my hand, even when he was too weak to speak. I swallowed hard, blinking back the tears. Noah was gone. But I was still here. And I owed it to him to live again. I spent the next few days carefully packing up his room. Not to erase him, but to move forward in a way that honored him. I donated most of his toys to a children's hospital, somewhere they could bring another little boy joy. I kept the things that mattered, his favorite book, his drawings, Mr. Wiggles. And finally, I turned his old room into something new. A space where I could remember him without drowning in the loss. Because Noah wouldn't want me to stay stuck in the past. He would want me to live. On the day Megan finally left town, I got one last message from her. It wasn't long. "Megan, I lost everything, Eric. I hope you're happy." I stared at it for a moment. Then I deleted it. Because Megan Carter no longer existed to me. She was nothing more than a lesson learned. And as I stepped outside, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face, I realized something. I had been through hell. I had lost my son. I had been betrayed by the person who was supposed to stand by me. But I had survived. And now? Now, I was finally free.